Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of LERU Talks. My name is Katrien Maas, and I'm Engagement Ambassador at the League of European Research Universities, and I'm the moderator of this program. So our topic today is the rapid rise of the use of AI by researchers when they develop research proposals, also by reviewers when they review research proposals for funding decisions. We'll look at the challenges and the opportunities. What are research universities, what are research funders doing to deal with all of this? And I would say among these issues to discuss, there is also an essential question. Could agentic AI topple grant funding systems? I mention that because my two guests today recently co-wrote a Nature comment with exactly that question as a title. So let me introduce them to you. We have Geraint Rees, who is professor of cognitive neurology and also vice provost for research, innovation, and global engagement at University College London. And we have James Wilson, who is a professor of research policy, also at College London, and he is also the executive director of the Research on Research Institute, RORI, which is probably known to some of you also. So it's great to have my two UCL guests here. UCL is, of course, a member of LERU. It's the first time we have two people from the same university in this format of LERU Talks, and they know each other very well. They co-wrote this article, so we are sure to have an exciting conversation. I am thrilled to have you both with us, and also a warm welcome to the online audience. I know you are there in droves, hundreds, more than 1,000 people registered for this webinar. It just goes to show how timely and important this discussion is. So after the conversation with the guests, about half an hour, there'll be time for questions from the audience. You can submit your questions via the Zoom chat function during the discussion, and we'll do our best to address as many of your questions as possible after the first 30 minutes. So let's start right away. I want to ask, what is agentic AI? Is that different from generative AI? Geraint, can you perhaps start?
Yes, it is. So generative AI, we've most commonly come across in the form of large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, and the like. And there, as everyone knows, it generates text in response to a prompt. So the human there, that would be me if I'm talking to Claude, decides what to include, what to emphasize, what to claim. Agentic AI is different because it essentially executes multi-step tasks on its own, autonomously. So it gathers information, makes intermediate decisions, produces outputs that emerge from a process that I, as the user, may not fully audit, understand, or control. So in the context of grants, you can think of it as generative AI might help polish or help you write a better application, but agentic AI will go off and write the application and submit it for you. So that can be trained on a researcher's entire published output, on funder's criteria, on previously funded grants, can generate, review, optimize the proposal, minimal human oversight. And so in agentic AI, the marginal cost of my time or my money in terms of producing an application falls to zero. That's important because it changes the nature of the problem. It's not about polishing your review or polishing your grant. It's about a system that's designed fundamentally to assess human judgment and human ideas, being fed outputs that simulate human judgment.
Okay, that's a perfect, that last bit kind of makes me wonder, is that what you see as the main problem of it in terms of the research funding system?
Hard to know where to start, but I think I'm gonna give you three problems, and James might add some more. Volume, quality, compression, and convergence. Let's just treat each one really quickly. So volume is one of the things we highlighted in our article. Every funder we see, all the RORI funders are saying application numbers are rising sharply. And by sharply, we're talking 20, 30% over 1 to 2 years. So we have PIs submitting more than 40 applications in a single round to some international funding schemes. So that's a volume problem, which is overwhelming review systems and overwhelming funders. Second big problem that's compounding with that is what I've called quality compression, or what we've called quality compression. When everyone's proposal has optimization and great writing, the quality floor rises, but the ceiling stays the same. And so it becomes harder to discriminate between really, really good grants and really excellent ideas and ones that are just okay. So funding starts to feel a bit more like a lottery. And for some people, it's always felt a bit like a lottery. Then finally, convergence, that's the long-term problem. If you've got agents writing and agents reviewing, and the agents are talking to each other, the problem is they're all trained on exactly the same work. And so what we know about AI systems is that over time, the system isn't going to evaluate great ideas. It's just going to measure how well agents simulate what funders have previously rewarded. And that's a real existential threat to what we're trying to do, the epistemic process of peer review or indeed of grant preparation. What do you think, James? Is that a good three, or are you going to add a fourth?
No, I think that's you've hit the nail on the head as ever, Geraint. I mean, yeah, and I mean, as Geraint says, we're seeing these three linked phenomena across a very wide array of funders in a broad range of systems. Of course, I mean, AI isn't the only thing going on, but and agentic AI in particular is really only. The capacity to do these things only really came on stream towards the end of 2025 in a major way. I mean, agents have been around for longer than that, but in terms of their open availability for these kinds of tasks, that's really a phenomenon of the last 8-9 months at most. So in terms of the visibility of that wave in the data, we're still at a very early stage, which is one of the points we make in our Nature piece. Much of the growth, I mean, as Geraint says, we looked at 12 funders in 7 systems, and overall saw 57% growth from the introduction of ChatGPT through to the end of 2025 in volume data. The indications we have of data for 2026 are that that the rate of growth is accelerating even further, which would align with our sort of broad argument. Other things are happening. It's not the only driver of volume changes, but one has to see AI as playing a role. And as Geraint says, I think we're really only at the beginning of the effects of this, particularly in funding contexts and funding calls that are open to a very broad pool of applicants, potentially for more than one application. I mean, the ERC is particularly vulnerable to this sort of tragedy of the commons kind of problem, as it were, and we see that already in the issues that ERC has been surfacing over volume in recent months.
So if you think it's bad now, just wait another year. I mean, that's the urgency. That's the urgency, really, of trying to address the problem, because the tools are improving at such a rapid rate that we run the risk that it's going to outpace our ability to adapt or transform the grant funding system to cope with this. And that's a big near-term risk, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about, what is being done to address, these problems that you mentioned. But actually, the urgency of the problem makes me ask another question first, should we just have a moratorium on using AI for writing research proposals? Should we just put it in the fridge for a while?
So it sounds really attractive, doesn't it? Until the fridge definitely sounds very attractive in Europe right now. That's very good. I'm going to put my head in the fridge now.
Sorry for the distraction.
No, that's quite all right. I'm feeling as hot as everyone else on the call. The basic problem is you can't. So bans, let's be honest, bans are not enforceable. We can claim that we might be able to detect AI use. For example, the M dash is held up by many, including my kids, when I write emails to them as a sign of AI usage. But the truth is, some people like me use M dashes in our normal speech. And what we know from evaluations of attempts at AI detection is that actually there's a huge number of false positives. So it's not really, in my view, a practical approach to ban it. You're relying on something that's actually unenforceable.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if you
James.
share that belief, James,
Well,
or are you
I mean,
more of
just
a
to reinforce and complicate that further. I mean, as people become more accustomed and are routinely using agentic tools and systems, on their desktop in their normal uh, everyday life as sort of academics, as researchers, um, there's a hybridization that's going on as well. I mean, my agent. If I build a review agent to support my peer review, uh, that agent, as Garrett was saying earlier, can be trained on previous reviews I've written. It can be trained on my way of writing, my style, linguistically, etc. And so it's not as simple as the old sort of Gen AI problem of just generating generic LLM text is complicated by the fact that there's a hybrid element through this approach that brings in one's own expertise and one's own sort of prior work. And people who are using these tools sensibly aren't going to be, pressing a button, sitting back and letting an AI generate without any oversight whatsoever, an ERC application. They're going to be using the AI alongside their own work, their own input. So that further complicates the already significant challenge of detection. I mean, these tools, I mean, Pangram, they'll tell you, well, it's 73% AI, 27% human. But I mean, it's really difficult to get a handle on these systems. And
Yeah.
I agree. I just don't think that's a realistic
and
approach.
if you think about it, there is a deeper problem, which is we're not contemplating, for example, banning AI in the research itself. So we say that, oh, that's very exciting. We can use AI tools to analyze brain imaging data in my field. So it's kind of conceptually incoherent to say, actually, we're going to use AI in everything right up to the process of the writing bit, but then we're going to ban it. That's kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
So I think, if you're a funder attempting to enforce a ban, you've got a choice between false positives, where you punish researchers wrongly, and futility. You've got a ban that everyone knows is unenforceable. So I think I'm all for relying on people's honour. I recently reviewed some grants for UKRI, which said the reviewer must not use agentic AI or generative AI, and I didn't. But I'm not sure anyone could detect if I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And in another very recent commentary in Nature, it says like it will, find words like delve into, and delve into is a giveaway for an AI. And I'm like, what? I mean, that's completely.
But again, it's a problem of false positives.
Yeah.
I used N dashes before AI.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now I'm censoring the kind of way I write to remove some of the ways I write, because
Yeah.
some people will look at it and say, oh, Garrett's been using AI to write his emails to his children.
Yeah. I want to talk about academic freedom because you talk about censorship. I want to talk also about like other solutions or what people are doing, especially research funders. What about lotteries? And lotteries have been suggested, I think, with or without the presence of AI. But do you think that's a possible solution? Can that alleviate something?
James, well, you have a go. You know about lotteries.
Well, yeah, I mean, lotteries. I mean, I'm in general a fan of experimenting with lotteries in certain contexts. That they have a definite role in the system. Um, I'm a bit reluctant to see them as a solution to this problem, because it seems to me, if in response to a combination of the three trends that Geraint outlined, volume growth, score compression, and convergence, we in a sense retreat back to saying, well, it's all just a big lottery, let's throw them in a bucket and pick them out. We're kind of sort of rather abdicating our responsibility to try and run the research system in any kind of strategic way. And so I'm a little bit, I guess, as one might expect from a professor of research policy, a little reluctant to sort of concede that territory to utter arbitrary randomness.
Yeah,
Although I
I
agree
mean,
that it is de facto what ends up happening in certain contexts.
it just defeats the purpose, right? When we run research funding systems, those are surely trying to identify the best ideas from the best teams delivering the best science. And if we put everything in and just treat it as a lottery, we're essentially abandoning that principle. We're saying that's not what the case is. Now, there are ways to rescue that, to do peer review, for example, that submits everything above a threshold to a lottery.
Yeah.
But in my experience, everyone hates lotteries because the people who've won the lottery just feel they've won it by chance rather than by their expertise, and the people who lost feel they've been cheated out of their attempt. So there's also a kind of acceptability
Really? I mean,
criterion here. Well,
like the
that's
way
some
you
of the
explain
experience
it,
of
with
using.
if you get within the threshold, if I look, for instance, at the EU funding, the top ranked candidates, there are, their scores are so close to each other that you could then people have to decide this one, but not this one. And they tend to do that. Do they do that objectively? I mean, sometimes they have some criteria, but you can really start to argue about, is that criteria even useful to pick that
Yes.
So
one over that
again,
one?
we're
Remember
missing the
And
score
yeah,
compression, Catherine. That, I mean, sorry,
yeah.
yeah, I mean,
yeah,
No, you were saying the
that
same thing as me,
applies, of
James. You know.
course, if the process is working as intended. But go back to a model where you've got not only volume growth but also upward score compression, and you've
yeah,
got agent versus agent. I'm using an agent to support the application
yeah,
process. You're using an agent to review. So, at that point, the what we used to call a sort of grey zone problem in
yeah,
research funding, which is exactly as you describe, and the context in which I support the use of lotteries, that is no longer a stable zone, if you like. It's now also become uh, degraded and sort of
Yeah.
invalidated to some extent by the problems we're describing. So it is
yeah.
a sort of multi-pronged problem. This.
Final thing, remember the best way to win a lottery is buy a lot of tickets. So if I've got agentic AI and I want to win the lottery, I want to
Yeah,
put as many grants as possible into the lottery.
yeah,
So it's directly incentivizing me to write lots and lots and lots and lots.
yeah, yeah. And that's not where you want to be going, right? This is just as a lead in to kind of my next question. And I have so many questions still. We're going to have to do something about this because we only have 15 minutes. Because I kind of want to talk about equity also. I want to talk about research integrity, but I'm going to come back to the one that you in your article say. And I also want to talk about what is being done at universities and what they can be doing. And for instance, what are you doing at UCL, or what is your leadership doing? Uh, anyway, but the first one I wanted to ask is the bigger fix that you're proposing in the Nature commentary. Can we talk about that? Sort of not the knee-jerk fixes, but the bigger fix about fixing the system, which then also goes into recruitment, progression, and how we look at that.
Yeah, so maybe I'll start and James can follow on. I think what we're arguing for, first of all, is a fix that brings funders and those who are funded together, right? Because at the moment, we've got a situation where funders are bringing in short-term fixes that often offload some of the work onto universities. Please only submit a small number of applications. Please do triage, things like that. Or they're inconsistent across funders. So you need organizations like Rory to help coordinate, because one funder is saying interview only face-to-face, another is saying limit the number of applications. But I think it's really about thinking deeply about the architecture of the current system, which is no longer fit for purpose because of LLMs and agentic AI. And the architecture is trying to evaluate the best ideas from the best teams in the best institutions to deliver the best science. So we have to wind back and think about perhaps evaluating on things that agentic AI can't simulate.
Mm-hmm.
Researcher track record as appropriate to their career stage, because early career researchers deserve special protection, in my view. Track record of delivering great ideas, and then thinking deeply about what a great idea is in the first place. It's not simply writing down, as it were, something well. It's also the content of the idea and how well the researcher or the team respond to challenge. So that's going to mean a different emphasis on how we evaluate people and grants, and a different way of architecturing the system.
Mm-hmm.
And that task is pretty urgent, so we'd better get on with it now.
Yeah.
James.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I agree with all that. I mean, I think what this series of developments prompts us to. I mean, these are not new problems, as it were. We've had long running slow burn problems in peer review systems, as we all know. But the speed of this particular wave of change forces us, as Geraint says, to confront a rather more fundamental set of challenges in how we structure the funding system. And I mean, I don't think there is an answer. It's going to have to be a mix of various measures, developed and tested and applied across, the range of instruments and calls that a specific funder uses, and ideally also at a sort of national system or indeed a pan-European level. If we think about the structure of funding systems, certain measures will optimize in one direction and deal with one bit of the problem, but they may create new problems, particularly as you say, Catherine, with respect to equity and fairness and sort of Matthew effects. I mean, we can all see ways in which AI, the capacities of AI, just as we're applying to writing proposals, could be applied at the funder end to help identify. One way to deal with the volume problem is I could sit there as the funder, build an agent to identify which 20 groups are best placed across the UK, Europe, whatever my funding universe is, to apply and develop a meaningful proposal to address the specific research problem or domain that I want to prioritize, and then I would invite those 20 to apply. That is a route through the volume problem, but that obviously is open then to Matthew effects, because you're not, you don't allow new players in. So one needs to think about this in a more collective way across funders. I mean, certainly that's where we're focusing in Rory. We're now working with a lot of funders on exactly this. What are the mix of responses? How does one develop those? There are lots of funders now already testing stuff out, often in shadow. So one nice thing about these tools is you can run them, as it were, in the background of regular processes and look at how they would deal with the process of a given call, separate to the actual process. And there's a lot of that going on now across many funders, public and foundations across Europe elsewhere.
I'm going to put you on the spot, James, because the League of European Research Universities, one of our main interests is, of course, the Horizon Europe, the framework program for research. So could you formulate a recommendation for them as they are designing the next framework program to come in?
Well, yeah. I mean, if we focus on the ERC bit, which is perhaps the easiest, or at least the most conventionally managed bit of the system. I mean, there, of course, we can see the volume problems growing. We can see the attempts that were made recently by the ERC to limit reapplication were resisted by the community. Have been sort of, they've retreated from that, at least for now. My expectation, though I haven't seen the latest data in volume numbers in the last couple of months from the ERC, but my full expectation would be that numbers will continue to grow given the nature of those calls, the range of, obviously, as also further countries associate the framework program, more can apply, and then the use of AI. So they've got to do something quite radical, in my view, to deal with this. And I think that they are a funder that needs to, and I think they are at least thinking through options and models, but politically it's quite difficult, as they've already experienced, to try and drive that kind of change. So I would encourage any funder to be open about the challenge and hopefully work with the community to try and test and then scale solutions and options that work. But it won't be a smooth and easy transition. I think when it comes to then sort of pillar 2 type project, there's probably a separate conversation to have, which I'll go into now. But I mean, that there are also challenges there.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, we only have 5 minutes left, but there's so much to discuss still. I want to switch to Geraint and ask about universities. How, we've talked about funders, now the universities, how are they dealing with these issues? Can you talk a little bit about how it's being done at UCL? Are you doing anything? Can you train? Can you give guidelines to your researchers? Well, how are you looking at this?
So, yes, we are doing a lot. As you'd expect, our researchers are very active. They are experimenting with not just large language models, but with generative AI in all its forms in the research process. I've mentioned, for example, brain imaging, where for many years we've been using artificial intelligence, as we now call it, and generative AI, as we now call it, to do that. So it's nothing new. We looked at, for example, our research integrity, how we declare AI usage, areas like that, revise those. And as we see AI as something that's running through everything we do, so it's like electricity, it doesn't need a separate, in our view, policy that says AI policy any more than you'd have a university electricity policy. You would have policies about research integrity. You'd have policies about authorship. You'd have policies about declaration of help and usage, just as you declare in a grant. If you'd received assistance from an outside consultant, you should also declare with AI. So we are doing that. I think less so in agentic AI, and less so in the use of coding, simply because, as James said earlier in the call, those have come along so quickly and in the last few months. And we're grappling, as I'm sure many colleagues on the call at other universities are, with the rapidity of these changes, which go much, much faster than institutional governance and decision-making cycles. So that's quite challenging. What we're also seeing is the knock-on effect of funders making these knee-jerk, in my view, no, let me be more polite, often knee-jerk, sometimes knee-jerk reactions, where we're having to cope with things suddenly. So, for example, a major British funder recently halted an early career research call midway through the call, saying, we've got too many applications. We now want the university to, in fact, every university, so 74 institutions in the UK, to devise a triage process to take the 34 applications that we submitted down to 3, so their funding systems could cope. Now, I don't know if that's driven by AI, but that's a real workload implication for my colleagues in the university that suddenly have to devise and execute under time pressure a triage solution. People are starting to become unable to attend interviews. I was unable to attend an interview for a grant I'm on because the government funding agency mandates in-person attendance, and I was out of the country at the time on official business, so I wasn't allowed to attend hybrid. So that's the second area where we're coping with the various different approaches that each funder has adopted. And perhaps what we would love to do, but haven't done yet, is we haven't seen a lot of engagement from the funders coming forwards to us as a major university to say, how can we co-design something together to work with that? Of course, Rory is one of the mechanisms to do that, and we love having the Research on Research Institute associated with UCL. But I think we haven't yet seen, or I haven't yet seen, that kind of partnership working that I think is really going to be needed to get through this.
Yeah. Yeah, great. James, what do you, since Geraint was mentioning Rory, what is your take on this?
Well, I mean, I think on the university side, there's definite scope for, leading universities, obviously including those in LERU, to work with funders and with, meta scientists like us to try and test out these different solutions. I mean, I'm very interested in the scope to, take a group of researchers, as it were, work with them to build these agentic tools in a sort of real funding situation, test out, as it were, how good they can get, how quickly, with what support from the university, from, I mean, as a sidebar, I mean, what does all this mean for the future of the research office in the university? I mean, that's a seminar in itself, but the kind of support and skills and methodological capabilities required from the university to support researchers to perform to their best within this system, however the system itself then adjusts, is crucial. And I think we are still at the stage, and I would say this as a researcher on this stuff, but I do think we're at the stage where we need to be trying stuff out and seeing what works in what context, how. I definitely don't think there are easy single solutions. As I keep saying, I'm about to reply to someone else in the chat here on this. It's going to be a mix of measures, and we're going to have to keep adjusting because, of course, the tools themselves are evolving very, very fast. And this is another big dimension of challenge in all of this, that just even keeping pace with what can be done, even while we in Europe now are being held back from some of the frontier versions of Claude and other things. There's still a hell of a lot happening within all of these systems very, very quickly, and it's a full-time job just keeping abreast of what they can do, let alone how we respond. So yeah.
The speed of this is perhaps daunting. I don't know. It's anyway. We need to move on. We've used up our half hour of talk, and now I'd like to get to the audience questions. And trying to scan them a little bit, and I was hoping that somebody would ask about equity, because that was kind of on my mind as well. But there's another question which sort of relates to that, which I'd like to pull out, which is it says basing research evaluation on individual track records already makes it very difficult for young scientists to compete for any bigger grants. Do you have other ideas to solve this? This is by Paulina Anna Dabrowski. Thanks for the question. Do we have other ideas? So in general, I mean, young scientists, or, perhaps scientists with that are disadvantaged, or I'm trying to raise the question in addition to this particular question, the larger question of equity also.
So the usual way to do this, which is quite effective, is to reserve a proportion of your funding budget for early career scientists. And that's, of course, how the ERC handles it, with starter grants all the way up to advanced grants. And that seems to be very effective. So personally, I think that's one sensible way to address an equity problem in a competition. Now, that doesn't address the problem if you're evaluating track records on open calls. But perhaps we need to think again more intelligently about the type of calls that are directed to people earlier in their careers, or teams earlier in their careers. We need to think about team composition, because, of course, a lot of people apply not just as individuals, but as members of a team, and think about those. But I think there are existing solutions that work already, because, of course, a component of all evaluation systems right now is to look at the individual or the team and their track record, which is different now for early career researchers. Fellowships are another example, directed at early career researchers specifically in terms of salary support as well as project support. And that would be another way to modify your grant funding system. I don't know if James has any other suggestions.
No, I agree with that. I mean, this might be an arena in which lotteries then come back into play. I mean, in the sense, if you're dealing with larger grants through some other measures, you accept that, there's going to be a very large pool, as now, of earlier career applicants. Typically, although some fellowships obviously will give more money, but typically those might be for smaller volumes of funding, at least in certain calls. And you just, resign yourself to a sort of AI augmented lottery-based system. Alongside other approaches to other funding instruments through the system as a whole. So I think that there will be a need to think quite hard about the distributional and equity effects of this. But I would say also that used well, AI systems do at least have the potential. I mean, it needs to be again carefully tested, but do have the potential to overcome some of the biases and epistemic short-sightedness that we all bring to selections in other contexts. They can look across at obviously lightning speed vast populations of potential applicants and researchers, and judge, if properly designed, to do so in a more impartial, at least, or it can be designed hopefully to do so, way than a for example, a demand management process inside a university, which I think is very can be very subject to other problems of sort of internal institutional bias. So I mean, I'm sorry not to have an easy answer to this. I just don't think there is. But equally, maintaining the model as it currently stands is not going to work either, for the reasons we're saying. So
yeah. Also in the question, somebody, since we were talking about lotteries again, somebody says, what about the half lottery? So in a way, we already know this. You have a short proposal, a few pages first, describing just a research idea. And then these proposals are peer reviewed for stage 2. And in the second stage, a lottery is applied. The person says, sorry, I can't figure out your name. It says that would reduce the load of the panels. And since the proposals are short, it may be less attractive to use AI to them. Does that argument hold for you?
I mean, ish. Yeah, I mean, typically that's how lotteries are used. We sort of call it partial randomization, and I mean, they're usually being used in that sort of hot, two-stage kind of way. Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't entirely get us around the problems we're describing of volume and score compression in terms of what gets through to stage two if you on the model being outlined here. So that's the challenge. But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not against. I mean, in Roaring, we've done a lot of work on lotteries as a method, so I'm not arguing against the use of lotteries in the right context. But I don't think they get us round some of these problems for the reasons we're saying. But
Okay.
neither do I. I mean, Geraint is answering the point about interviews and sort of, seeing people face to face. I mean, again, that's attractive at one level. You get around at least in terms of testing out people's capacity to deliver. But of course, A, it's very labor intensive. You can't do it across huge volumes of applications, and B, it's also then susceptible to other forms of
Yeah,
bias.
I think the thing to remember is there's going to be no silver bullet in terms of equity that you mentioned earlier, Katrine. So there's no equity, there's no bias-free approach. So evaluating people through face-to-face interviews, as James has just said, that's great for people who are really good at face-to-face interviews and are really good at talking in podcasts and things like that. And that's not so good for people who aren't. So it's evaluating not just, again, the person and the ideas, it's also evaluating an extra thing, which is how well that individual can convince a panel, which is perhaps not quite the same as how well that individual can do scholarship or science. So my take on it is there's no silver bullet that says if you adopt this particular method, then you've solved the problem. It's going to be about shifting the balance of all of these existing ways we have of assessing ideas and people, and adding to that some of the interesting ideas James was talking about, say, research funders using AI in a positive way to think about who might be out there that would be best placed to answer particular questions.
Yeah. Okay. You're answering some of the questions directly or indirectly that are in our chat, which is great, because I think I hope we are addressing questions that people are interested in hearing about. I'm kind of I want to get to the one about the global south also, but I'm also intrigued by the electricity metaphor, which I don't understand. Does anybody understand electricity? It says it's a question from Jan Broersen.
Something to do with electrons.
Is a neurologist knows something about electricity, right? It says it's like a necessary condition for university activities, but AI is threatening to go more in the direction of a sufficient condition. Not all the way, of course, but it has a much more fundamental impact. So we're talking about necessary versus sufficient conditions. Does that ring a bell for you?
I'm not sure I quite understood the question, but I get that electricity is a metaphor that's imperfect with respect to AI. I think, just to clarify, what I'm meaning is that AI affects all stages of the research process, from conceiving of an idea, which can now be assisted by AI, or in some cases generated by AI, through the research process of evaluation itself, which is what we're talking about on this call, through every stage of the research process. Now, that will differ across disciplines. Your lived experience in philosophy is very different to your lived experience in a STEM discipline of the use of AI tools. And there may be different impacts on that. But AI has something potentially to either offer in a positive way or detract from in a negative way, all of those stages. And so that's what I mean by the transformation of AI. The same is true in universities, of course, of education. We know that the vast majority of students, whether they declare it or not, are using AI in their daily practice, and they're using AI all the time in their personal lives. So this whole transformation that's underway is something we've got to think very carefully about. And what we're focusing on in this call, of course, is the immediate impact on a system which has relied on the fact that only one person, essentially our grant funding system has relied on the fact, it's gated by the fact that if I'm on a call now, I can't be writing a grant. But actually agentic AI changes that. If I'm on a call right now, my agentic AI can quite happily be writing a grant for me. And so the system is not designed to either assess the volume or the quality of what can be produced. And that's the fundamental issue we've got to deal with.
Okay. So I'm going to throw in here a question that comes from the boss, Kurt Ketelaar, who is the
Mm.
Secretary General of LERU, sort of following up a little bit on what you just said. So he says, some say there's a bigger institutional responsibility here to better guide academics in their application approach, the right moment, the right topic, the right funder. For instance, applying for the ERC successfully is not for every researcher. So should we better steer, or is this too much of a limitation on academic freedom?
Well, I would see it as in a positive light. This is about bringing to life opportunities that a researcher or an academic might have missed. So I see it in a positive, enabling way rather than a negative way. So I can't speak for all institutions, but I think from my institution's perspective, we would not say to people, you cannot apply for this. That would be a restriction on academic freedom that we would not accept. What we might do, of course, is what we do all the time at the moment, which we say, yeah, maybe you're a little bit, a year or two too early for this particular grant. Maybe if you, boost this area of your practice and do these kind of things, you'd be in a great position in a year or two's time to apply for an ERC advanced grant or whatever. But that would never override the individual's agency, at least in my institution, that if they say, oh, well, thank you, Geraint, for that great advice, I'm going to ignore you and apply for the ERC advanced grant, we'd say, great, that's fantastic, go ahead. I think AI is the same, but of course, what AI can do for us is help for every individual. For example, identify potential collaborators they might not have thought of, potential teams they might not have thought of in other institutions, potential topics adjacent to their research they might not have thought of, and of course, potential funding calls that they might not have thought of. We're certainly thinking about all of those. That doesn't really solve the problem if you're a funder, because if you're a funder, what it means is the AI our institution is using is helping more people put in more applications at a higher quality to the system. So again,
James for a comment, but before I forget my question, just to get to my question after James answers, because it brings up the question also of you said looking for new collaborators. I want to get back to that equity and access issue. Is agentic AI going to suggest collaborators in the global south? Is it going to think of that? Because we know there's all kinds of bias that works in different ways in the AI system. Park that question for a minute, if you will, back to James to react to what.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a link to both parts of the question. I mean, it all hinges on how one designs the questions that one's asking of the of the AI, as it were. But of course, we need to be very conscious of these kinds of biases and algorithmic injustices in the way that we construct these sorts of systems. But I mean, to go back to some of our earlier points, I mean, if you're building if we're building a UCL agentics, we can decide as a university to optimize towards strategic partnerships with certain countries in the global south. I mean, there's no inhibition on using the systems towards that goal, but the AI is not going to develop your strategic priorities for you. The AI can help you act upon them. You will have to decide how much weight to place as an institution on certain priorities in terms of funding areas and certain priorities in terms of collaboration and partnership. But I mean, to Kurt's question, I mean, I am also quite nervous about it becomes a bit like the Spielberg Minority Report film, where you have sort of the research office evolving into a kind of internal precog function that decides in advance whether I am or am not going to succeed in a funding bid. And I think that presupposes a system that is working optimally already, and I think we all recognize that the system is now, let alone with the agentic AI, often quite arbitrary in the results it can throw out. So I think it is more about shaping and helping and supporting in the way that Geraint's saying. But then the onus still remains on the funders to decide how to construct systems and limits and caps and whatever to ensure that processes remain manageable. So it's got to happen at both levels. But I think it's tricky to sort of place too much. I mean, I think there's a very positive role and to link in another question, if I may, just quickly, Catherine, we're focusing a lot on some of the negatives here. I do think there's a lot of positives in all of this that we're in danger of losing sight of. I was first made aware of the full capability of these tools at a conference over in West Coast, where a sort of early adopter US academic sat me down, showed me the NSF application tool he built in OpenClaw, and described how it had reduced his workload in applying for NSF grants from a day a week to 45 minutes a week. And I mean, I think a lot of us would see that as a very positive development in terms of reducing the burden and bureaucracy of a system. So, it can be beneficial at the like micro level for the individual, but still cumulatively create new challenges for the system as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. To the extent that it's also helping research, provide that role of new knowledge, creativity, originality, as long as we're not losing that, right?
Well,
But,
absolutely. As Gary said,
turning out lots of research proposals to flood the market, to maximize your chances and so on, may not be optimal for
but you can have an AI for that, right? Your AI can optimize. No, I mean, seriously, right? It won't be long before the AI would be able to conceive of an optimal strategy for the early career researcher in terms of pursuing, say, an objective function of getting more grant funding. You would set your agent the task, I want more grant funding, and the agent would go off and do that.
Well, and it would also adjust for different funding contexts. So it might be to take my NSF example again, it might be for a kind of classic NSF grant. You actually don't want to propose anything too radically novel because you know that mechanism is not well set up to fund it. But if you were applying, stay in the US for a second, for a MacArthur Genius Award, you use a different approach. But your agent again can help. You can build a tool to help you, as Geraint says, optimize your path through all those different choices. I mean, that's easily doable right now.
So that's the flip side, isn't it? We've been talking a lot about negative threats from AI, but one could see that as an opportunity. And I think somebody in the chat was asking about opportunities. An agentic AI in that sense is more like a life coach, somebody who can give you advice on the best funding schemes, on how you're applying, on what you're doing. And providing that kind of information in a 24/7 private, confidential, so long as the right policies are applied, way. And that's a different way to think about AI, I think, in a positive frame, rather than just as a threat.
Okay. I want to go back to that Global South question, which I'm trying to locate now. Oh, yeah. How to prevent those without access to, between brackets, paid for AI being penalized or even excluded from success in the grant funding system. For instance, those in the Global South.
So I agree that's a big equity issue. I think my initial response is that's similar to all sorts of equity issues about access to other things that help with research, access to research equipment, access to high quality environments, access to libraries, access to journals. I'm not sure that access to AI is a qualitatively different equity issue to that. It's about resource provision. And so therefore, if that's correct, then maybe the answer to that is to ensure that there is equitable provision of AI usage, in the same way that, for example, the open access movement has successfully, in my view, democratized access to research outputs across the global north and global south, or the global majority and global minority countries, depending on your view. So I'm not seeing... Go on.
Doesn't it also add to, yet another hurdle?
Yes. Yes, to be frank. So we just have to dismantle that hurdle, just like we did with open access for access to research outputs that are behind paywalls.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, it's not even a global south issue. I mean, in the sense that we're currently, looking at my Claude page, we're still obviously excluded in Europe from accessing the latest version of the readily available commercial AIs that the colleagues in the US are using. So, we have to think about that in terms of sovereign AI capabilities, all those sorts of debates as well. Yeah.
Gosh, if you pick up on interesting questions, I don't know if you have time to look at the chat, but feel free. I'm trying
Yeah,
to
so
scan.
Jochen's asking an interesting question most recently, which is this really just AI hype, and is everything going to crash and burn as the token-based economy implodes? And I've got some sympathy for that. I think there is an argument that says the usage of AI is might not be as hugely widespread and massively transformational as some of the most extreme advocates are saying. We've got to be alert to that. But having said that, I'd come back to what we said at the very start of this call, that what we're seeing since the introduction of ChatGPT is an explosion in grant funding applications and a change in the way they're written. So to that extent, that problem is already here. That problem is already a real and present challenge for grant funders. So I think it will get worse for the reasons we also discussed, that agentic AI has only just arrived. But that doesn't require making any assumptions about the future of AI. I think it's a problem for now. And I think there are a set of challenges like that for all of these human activities where we gate them by making humans write something down on a piece of paper and send it in, whether it's a planning objection or a, an HR complaint or a grant. These systems rely a little bit on humans having to be doing the writing, and it therefore taking time, and humans only being able to do one of the things at once. That has now gone with respect to grant applications, because Claude or whoever, your favorite agent, can write as many applications as you want when you're doing something else on a lovely LERU Talks call. Although in my case, Claude is not doing that, just to reassure people on the call.
No, nor for me. But I mean, just to add on Jochen Mayer's question, I mean, of course, one of the reasons these tools are so effective when it comes to processes relating to the scientific research system is that we've spent the last 20 years, putting more and more stuff openly out there, as you say in your question. I mean, I don't think that. I mean, while there are obviously bigger sort of structural issues in terms of the databases on which LLMs are constructed, I mean, we haven't exactly reversed the move to open research and open access. Indeed, many of us, I'm sure, on this call would be strong supporters and advocates for it. So, we've created an environment where we've put an enormous amount of very detailed technical information out there in an open form that can be, absorbed and assimilated and used by these tools. And I think that's going to probably continue because there's lots of inbuilt incentives to do that. I think from an institutional level, whether the university or indeed a funder, there's real questions about, keeping secure new and emerging ideas in terms of proposals, and what sort of sandbox type environments we can build either within a university or within a funding call context to enable us to harness the power of the AI tools, but not, as it were, release everything out into the open model. And I mean, that, I'm sure is something that Geraint worries about from an institutional perspective.
Geraint, yeah. Oh, I see you nodding, but just, yeah.
Yes, nodding. Well, I'm answering another couple of questions in the chat by typing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, lots of interesting questions. Somebody mentioned, Marta Agostino from EU Live, Bollens in, I forget, I can't find the question anymore, but I was wondering, what is that? And in terms of lotteries also, does that mean anything to you? No.
This is like a sort of a researcher basic income proposal, I think, if I've read it correctly. So this is another, I think we nod to this in our nature piece. Certainly we did in one of the drafts. Yeah. So I mean, that's another solution to this. You say, well, essentially, if we can't allocate on any rational basis, let's take the research pot, divvy it up by the number of eligible researchers, and just hand them out an annual research grant. There was a sort of variant on this proposed in Nature by two of our UCL colleagues in response to our piece, of a sort of kind of like an emissions trading cap and trade system as well for the right to submit a proposal. My view of both, although they're slightly different proposals, they're both rather over complex and unrealistic responses to the challenges we're outlining, it not least because of the multi-funder quite complex environment that most of us are operating in I mean, we're not in a managed bound system in the sense that one could say who is and isn't in a basic income sense. I mean, how, take the ERC, imagine taking the ERC's budget and divvying it up across all eligible researchers across not only the EU member states, but all associated countries. We'd end up with about 14 pence each, or 14 cents each. So, it wouldn't go very far. And with the kind of permit trading idea, I mean, I could sort of see the attractiveness at a theoretical level, but I think it becomes very complex to administer quite quickly. I don't know. I'll
Okay.
put a link to that letter in the chat. You can see what you
Yeah, I've put in the chat the Boland's proposal and the original paper for people who like to read the original paper, which is much better than the summary.
Which was not written by AI.
I have no idea, but I certainly my AI helped me find those links, which was great. Thank you, Gemini.
Yeah. What about sort of we have to finish up soon, but I was thinking about data protection because in those European Research Area Guidelines that are living guidelines, as I was reading them, it said research organizations should apply the guidelines the ERA Forum has provided, adopt them, amend them, and they should also deploy their own generative AI tools to ensure data protection and confidentiality. Does that ring with you?
People using their own AI tools. Well,
your university should have your own Gen AI tools so that you can...
So it's a little more complicated than that, isn't it? Because of course most universities have some business AI tool. For us, it's Microsoft Copilot, which is bundled into our subscriptions that we use for Microsoft Office. Now, obviously, in different European universities, that will be different, but I imagine most universities have got a corporate solution. And of course, there are, remember in the research process, there's AI in all sorts of things like brain imaging data analysis, transcriptomics, genomics, and so on. Now, we use all of those tools, those research tools and the corporate tools already in secure environments. We have guidance about that. So for most universities, I think the issue is about the unsanctioned use outside the organization of something on your smartphone or on your personal computer at home, where for most universities, we really do not want people putting confidential data or even sensitive data into those systems. So that's one thing. It's then possible to train your own tools, absolutely. So a classic way to do that would be to train an open access model, perhaps, to answer perhaps a set of queries using the language of the institution. So the obvious use case there is, for example, answering course queries from students that can rely on a given knowledge base and tone of voice. And that's certainly possible. I think where the jury is out, and I'm not aware of any institutions, is training a single huge, large-scale, large language model just for that institution. I think the cost of that would be prohibitive for most large institutions because it's of the order of tens of millions of euros minimum. And so I don't think that's a viable approach. So that whole field of training models and how to use them is evolving quite quickly. You see it in the commercial sector. And I think universities will have to pay attention to that and think about what their corporate policy is. But it's a little bit early to get into that sort of sovereign, well, it's not sovereign, the institutionally specific AI.
Okay. I'm sorry to have to kind of cut it off here because we have run out of time, but not until I ask both of you that question that we start with. Will agentic AI topple the grant funding system? Yes or no?
No, it's not about toppling. It's about forcing reform. Yeah, so what it's doing is it's forcing reform.
Yeah, I agree. I think if we don't do anything, we're in trouble. But I'm sure there are responses ongoing, and they need to accelerate. But yeah, I'm sure we can find a way through. It'll be a bit bumpy, but we'll get there.
Toppling is just too melodramatic, right? There are significant challenges here. Some of the challenges are good challenges. Some of them are bad challenges in terms of what we've talked about on this call. But if we frame it like that in a kind of disaster thing, I think we lose sight of what we need to do, which is to engage urgently, coherently, and consistently to start these things we talked about on this call, piloting them, putting them into proposals, finding out whether they work, the usual thing, treating the meta science here as an empirical activity. And going back to your EU example, the Horizon program is a perfect testbed for these kind of approaches. We're just coming up to renewing the whole program. There are huge opportunities if we get it right to embed that sort of meta-scientific activity in these programs and come up with a better way of rewarding the better ideas from better teams to do better science.
Okay, nice. James, you have the last word.
Well, on that, I mean, to take it to a European level, I mean, there was a good proposal to do more of this in the High-Talk report, of course, 18 months ago. And I know it's an ongoing discussion both within the ERC and within DGRTD. But I do think, whether it's described as meta science or whatever else, I think, no big funding program, including FP10, can afford to proceed without some kind of inbuilt, flexible, adaptive capacity to, experiment, test, scale things that work out what, problems as they arise in this kind of very dynamic situation. So I would urge those that have influence over these discussions in Brussels to ensure that stays on the agenda for the FP10 discussions. I think it's really going to be an important feature of the next framework.
Okay, thank you for that free advice. I'm sure LERU could do something with that. As you know, we are very interested in the next framework program for research. I'm afraid we've run out of time. We may not have answered everybody's questions, but I wanted to say, as if you want to our audience out there, if you want to send us your question, send it to me, Katrien.maas@leru.org. You'll find me somewhere. And we'll try to answer your questions. I'll try to hustle some more time out of my very very willing speakers here to see if you have any urgent questions that didn't get an answer and you still want to get one, send it to me. We'll try to get to them. This episode will also be on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it and rewatch it as many times as you like. I would just now say that thank you to my wonderful speakers. You have been amazing, exciting, thrilling. As you say, there are lots of opportunities there, but we need to look at it in terms of opportunities rather than threats. But we do need to come up with solutions as well, and it'll be interesting times. So thank you very, very, very much for being with us, Geraint and James, and to everybody also, thank you for being here. And until we see you next time on LERU Talks.
Thank you. It's been fun. No AI was used in the production of this talk.
I swear.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.